Thanks everyone for coming. I'm supposed to do it in English. It's a bit strange for me now because I gave like 4 talks in Russian. So, is there anybody here who doesn't speak Russian? That's okay. So I think it's okay if I do it in English. If not, I can also переключиться на русский and then switch back to English eventually. So what I want to cover today, and thanks for coming here by the way. What I want to cover today are some of the dirty tricks, and they are really dirty. I really mean it. It's not like, okay, whatever. They are some of the interesting things I explored while working with many e-commerce retailers in Germany and in Europe. And some things work, and I know that they will work to increase conversion. And the other side, I know that they will work, but they're very, very hard to implement. But depending on the situation, they might be extremely useful for you. So I want to kind of cover a couple of things. Not important, not important, not important, not important. What I want to cover today are 4 things, mostly. First of all, we need to look a little bit into the psychology of how we buy things, when we buy things, why we buy things, and when we don't buy things. Right? And then we need to look into some patterns we can use in our checkout and our e-commerce experiences, and then potentially looking at what other companies are doing. I'm not sure if we will get through all in trends, but we can have a discussion later. And then just summing up everything with a strategy of what we need to keep in mind for the future. And when it comes to e-commerce, it's remarkable how weird we as humans are. And if you think about the human factor, that's just a remarkable thing. If you think about it for a second, if you want to give somebody money, right? You want to buy something, you want to give somebody money, you have to go through at least 26 steps to get it done, right? And we don't go on the streets to protest against it, we just take it. We don't care, we just, okay, whatever, 26 steps, so be it. And there are many, many things, like going from adding the item to the shopping cart all the way to completing the payment. But of course, it's not always true, because sometimes you have a credit card failure, so you end up with a couple of extra steps for your convenience, obviously. And then the interesting thing is, of course, that eventually you're just done with it. You can't buy, you can't check out, so you forget about it. You go home, have your friends and family and cats and dogs and stuff who you care about, and you forget about it. But they never forget. They will send us recovery emails reminding us about the abandonment that we have something in the cart. And so we come back and we try to buy, and eventually we buy, and then eventually we need to download an invoice and stuff like that. And then hopefully it worked, and then we're done after 36 freaking steps. So no wonder that an average abandonment rate is around 70% at this point. Just think about it for a second. 7 out of 10 people who actually have an implication, have an interest in buying, end up not buying. That's a really big number. And there is, of course, no way to bring it to 0, but I can almost guarantee with some of the things you will see today, to improve that number by something towards 60 or 55%. I can almost guarantee that. And the main reason, by the way, why it's so high is also because we do window shopping when we're browsing, but we will get into it in a second. So you can never bring it to 0. Now, if we look into the reasons why people abandon, this will be the common reasons. Extra costs, for example, shipping, taxes, and fees. If you don't display them up front, then people will not trust you in buying. Also, if you force them to create an account, that's a problem. Credit card trust, if you're not trustworthy, people will not buy. If you have some complicated checkout process where things are just weird, it accounts for only 18%, which is not that much compared to everything else. And then, for example, if you don't support PayPal, but the customer prefers to pay with PayPal, of course they will end up not buying. Now, you might say, but that can't be true, because if you look into Amazon, well, they force you to create an account. And overall, some of you might have had this conversation before. Why do we need to improve things anyway? Let's just do what Amazon does. Let's just copy Amazon and fire the entire UX team. Sounds like a plausible argument, right? Because Amazon has been testing and doing things for many, many, many years, and very successfully too. So what's the point of reinventing e-commerce in the first place? How many of you had this conversation or something similar? Well, maybe not firing the UX department, but let's just do what Amazon does. That's a big mistake, because Amazon has very different priorities than your little shop. You have to fight for every single customer. Amazon has to fight to continue driving money from customers that are already on the platform. You don't have this luxury. So you have a very different perspective on things. So this is very, really important. And this is a study from 2013. And this is the one from 2015, where I looked into more specifically granularly into the reasons why people abandon. And specifically, if you can see, it's all the same. Presented with unexpected costs, was just browsing, found a better price elsewhere, website crashed. Well, if your site crashes, yes, people don't buy. That's kind of obvious, I guess. But then you also have things like concerns about payment security and other things. But the most important ones are the ones I listed below. Right? And again, this was repeated in 2017, the same story. So not transparent pricing, the site is too slow, too complicated checkout process, and all this stuff. And very important, I couldn't calculate total order cost up front. Right? And if we look in the top 1,000 retailers in the US, we'll find out that most of them perform really poorly, which is where our opportunity is. Right? If you look into this data, it's a report from Baymart Institute, which is an institute in Denmark, and they conduct studies, eye tracking and heat maps and all this stuff, and user interviews on e-commerce specifically. And so they started to break down the entire experience into parts. And so you'll find all the stuff like payment flow and order review and page design and cross-selling and so on and so forth. And then they map it against usability score of how well people perceive it, how comfortable they feel with this experience and so on. And this dark, maybe I should zoom in, this dark little circle here represents the average that you find across the entire industry. And as you will find, most of the time, it's pretty mediocre. Only few e-commerce retailers are actually good, which is why we can improve things and be better and actually gain customers this way. And there are some things that tend to work and others tend not to work. This is coming from Good UI, which is highly recommended to look at. But we will be looking at something very specific. But before we do that, let's just look a little bit for the next 5 to 10 minutes into how we buy and why we buy things. So first of all, there is no way to bring 70% to zero. Why? Because we buy offline or online in a very similar way. So you go offline, you are offline. You don't go offline. You go to the store if you want to buy jeans, you try them on, you leave. And maybe eventually you come back, you try them on, and then you buy them. And this is the same thing that we do online as well with window shopping. Right? We just come to the website, we add an item to the shopping cart, and then eventually we leave just to come back eventually. Now, here's a question for you. How many of you go to an e-commerce site and add an item to the shopping cart and go all the way till you have to type in the credit card data just to see the final price? Quite a good number of people. Isn't it weird? It's a very clear indicator that we don't trust them, right? They want to screw us over, so we're going to check all of the stuff and go all the way until we have to type in the credit card data just to see the final price, which also makes it a bit difficult to compare because we have to do it over and over on different sites, right? So this is why we abandon just because we want to see the final price. And at the same time, we do use the shopping cart as shopping cart. That's very important. Your shopping cart has to be persistent for at least 2 weeks. The longer, the better, because people come back and they kind of even expect it to be like a shopping cart which you left on the site, right? I mean, we're not talking about you being the customers, but normal people being our customers, right? So we know how it all works, but they don't know, so it's really important. Shopping cart has to be persistent. And the same way, people are very distracted. It's not like we go to a website just to check out. We tend to do check out and look into e-commerce pages many different times, and also in very different situations. And very often, for example, it's while watching TV or being in a bus. And so if you want to build a sculpture of a person who is about to buy your products, they will be stressed, tired, busy, potentially hungry, and they want things now. And you have these whistles and bells in your interface that make it slow for them. That's not a good idea to have it. And it heavily depends on the time and on the day when they're going to use it, right? And also, what's really interesting, they're doing something else while they're using your website, which is very common in e-commerce, right? So when it comes to car insurance, nobody comes to a site or dedicates 20 minutes of their life just to really buy car insurance. They'll be doing probably something else, specifically when it comes to clothing and fashion industry. And that else is usually more interesting and more exciting. Oh, didn't want to go back. Now, it's really interesting, though, that people really don't trust us. We've discovered that already. They experience this e-commerce being very fragile, which is why they tend not to click on links, for example, in the checkout, because things, data might get lost, or they don't want to go back on the previous step. In the same way, they find it hostile because they feel like we want to trick them into buying, which is actually true in many ways. Let's look at some examples. So, look at this. Isn't it a piece of beauty? So you can buy and configure a yacht on this website, right? That's quite something. And look at this video, and it's beautiful. And can you imagine, like, somebody really had to put some efforts and resources into this, and then you end up buying, right? When you want to configure, well, you select the preset, and eventually you end up on this beautiful configurator. What is that? So you're supposed to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a yacht, a beautiful yacht, right? And then you end up with this summary preview, which is just a little bit strange. So you start clicking around and you have no idea what's happening. And then you can scroll through photos, but you see only half of it, right? And then you can click on hide summary, and only then that box disappears, right? And this is just a strange experience in so many ways, right? And this is what people are expecting. This is a remarkable thing. People are expecting things to be broken or strange or weird. They don't expect it to be good at all, which is, again, our opportunity. And if we look into other things, like more common things, like buying a cinema ticket. I mean, I don't know about here in St. Petersburg, but this is experience people experience a lot. You go to the page where you want to maybe look into what movies are available. You get this pop-up. You click to close it. It opens a new tab, right? And then you come back and you still try to close it, and it still opens a new tab, right? This is just ridiculous. And then it gets even worse, because when you do want to buy on that site for some reason, for some miraculous reason, before you pay, just before you pay, when you want to give somebody money, they tell you, select your payment method. Please check the film, date, session, and that the information shown above is the one you have selected for your movie ticket, since you will not be able to make changes or refunds once the purchase is finished. Remember that you must present your credit card and official ID when collecting your tickets at the box office of selected cinemas, and it keeps going and going. Isn't it just despicable? Just so disrespectful in so many ways. And even interfaces like this. So this is an interface for buying an insurance as well. And look at, just bear with me for a second. This is a question, do you have children? So some designer at some point had to suggest that this is probably a good idea, and you can have at most 5 children, by the way, just saying. And if you want to have more, well, your only chance is to click on the pencil icon to then edit this number. And the question is, again, do you have children? Not how many children, but how do you have children? That's a little bit strange, I would say. But then even worse, this is, I mean, if you are sensitive about insects, please close your eyes now. I really mean it. This is probably the most disgusting e-commerce page I've ever seen in my life. So please do close your eyes. I will give you 2 seconds for it. That's not that hard. 1, 2. So somebody had to sit down, take a cup of coffee, right, and start drawing things and doing things in Photoshop and doing what you will see in a second. Just imagine somebody had to optimize for conversion, right, by doing this crap. Seriously, this is just despicable in so many ways. And again, in many ways, this is what customers are expecting. This is just so horrible in so ways. But not every company is so horrible. Some companies are just disrespectful again, like Ryanair. Well, I will never forget this thing what they had. If you want to book a flight with Ryanair, let's go back, with Ryanair, well, they had insurance added in for you automatically, unless you opt out, but you need to know how to opt out, because to opt out, you need to find it conveniently located as Don't Insure Me between Denmark and Finland. Right? That's just unbelievable. This is the level of evilness you might expect on the e-commerce. And then even things like this, right? Some of you might have seen this, the very popular Instagram ad, where they just photoshopped a hair because people don't want to have a hair on the phone. People started clicking on it accidentally just because of the hair, right? But then somebody said, no, it's not good enough. We can do it better. We can do it better. Let's add some dirt. Right? Because people don't like dirt on the phone either. So it's the same story. And then here, somebody like e-commerce retailer said, well, people don't read our emails. They tend to just mark it as read and done. Well, let's make it appear like it's not read yet. Right? This is just so weird in so many ways. And booking is an example for many things like that. But then if you look even into this, which looks very, friendly. Right? It's friendly. There is one little trick that drives conversion like crazy. One little thing in this interface, which is a trick, a hook, that drives conversion to the top like crazy. Can you guess what it is? What's so special about this? And obviously, you add something to the item, to the shopping cart, and you have a free gift there. But that free gift alone isn't really helping. Yes? Sorry? Zero, yes, so it's zero, but it's not that thing that actually drives it. It's much worse than that. You're not allowed to say anything. So this is, because for us, this is like the way, the reason why I'm showing this now, because we have a very different view than our customers have. For us, this is normal. For our customers, this is not normal. Why isn't it normal for them? Shipping, but there is something very special. So you see free gift, you see zero, but why the hell can you increment it? Isn't it a bit strange? So this is a trick. Why is it a trick? Well, when somebody lands on this page, first of all, they, out of curiosity, a big number of people will tap once, and they will see 2. And they will tap again, and they will have 4, right? And then eventually, of course, they want to check out, so we'll proceed with the checkout. And then there is this moment. There is this moment at the checkout, at some point, we don't know when they will come back and tap again to increase to 5 or to 6 or so. And when they do that, this is it. They're trapped. Because at this point, when they start checking out, they don't care about this product anymore that they're actually intending to buy. They don't have any doubts about buying it or not. They're just curious. Will they get 1 free gift or 5 or 6 or 7? Right? So this is why everything else is happening on autopilot and conversion goes like crazy. And it really heavily depends on when people buy. Because, for example, if you look into hourly conversion rate, can you spot some trends here? There are some outliers. Now, this is mapped, like if you take an entire week and you have a couple, you just chart the conversion along the days, along the hours of a day, and you'll find some trends. Now, one of them is quite obvious. If you look over here, here we have a high peak. Right? Which happens around 10 to 12 o'clock. And that one is actually Friday. Right? So people tend to buy, I mean, it's not like the traffic has increased at this time, just people tend to buy a bit more on Friday between 10 and 12. On the other side, there are actually 2 peaks. There is one in here and one in here. Now, can you guess why? Well, people don't buy when they're hungry, when they're tired, and when they're stressed. They buy when they're relaxed, when they're not hungry, and when they want to explore. And this is definitely not the time when they're hungry, right? And so here, just before, just after lunch, well, just before lunch, the conversion is actually the worst, but just after lunch, it increases. In the same way, it increases after dinner, right? So if you run your A/B tests, you really have to watch out for this. At the same time, if you look into traffic, it's a bit more stable. So if you just measure the traffic, this will not tell you a lot about the conversion, but the conversion is different. The chart of conversion is different for most like traditional e-commerce retailers. And here you will find a huge traffic spike over here around 9 or 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock. But then, of course, it's the worst on the Friday, because on Friday we're usually out. Right? That's one thing to notice. And it's also quite high on Sunday, and the conversion is then higher on Monday. So that's something to keep in mind. For every industry, it's going to be different, but that's just how people operate when they actually want to buy something online. Another thing that's interesting is that it heavily depends on what kind of products we're selling. So we can have two kinds of products, considered purchases or non-considered purchases. So there are things that are more expensive and things that are less expensive. For example, if you look into a car, people need time to convince themselves that it's a good investment. Right? It's not just something you buy within a few days or so. Some people might need years because this might be the most expensive thing they've ever bought so far. So they will need to come back to the site every now and again to test, to kind of convince themselves. Now, I was working with a German car manufacturer, and we had this conversation. So they were building a car configurator, but the question is, do we need to build a responsive car configurator? Because according to our data, there is not even one person who bought a car on mobile. So what's the point of making it responsive if nobody buys on mobile anyway? And that's a big mistake. Can you guess why? That's a huge mistake. A car configurator, yes? Sorry? Yeah, exactly, because you need time. If you want to buy a car, you need time to convince yourself that this is a good purchase. People want to be able to play with the idea. And when do people have time to play with the idea? When do you have time these days? On the road, when you're driving, no, not driving. When you're commuting, or? Sorry? Dinner breaks, or? Yes, or? There is a very important place that we all go to. Sorry? Yes, I want you to say that. Yes. On the toilet, that's very important. This is where we have time, right? And there is no way that it's very unusual, according to my research, that people take laptop to the toilet. They take phone to the toilet, but not the laptop. And this is where people have time to explore, because this is the time for themselves, right? And so this is where configurator is very important. Nobody will buy, and nobody will tell you in the user interview that I just looked at the car and the toilet, and then 2 days later I bought a car. This is not happening, right? But you can't just trust data, right? You have to be a bit more careful about that. And so, considered, non-considered, essentially everything that's very personal, everything that's like clothing or a gift, like flowers, for example, house, anything that's expensive, anything vintage, this is going to be taking time, right, for people to come back and explore this opportunity. While things like groceries, batteries, DVDs, CDs, small electronics, this is not taking that much time, which is why people tend to spend at least twice as much time with considered than with non-considered purchases. And they will be using multiple channels with considered, and with non-considered it's just going to be very fast, usually when commuting. And the last thing I want to show you here is that I don't want to be that person, but yes, images are important. The bigger the images, the better. Because people tend to focus on visuals. We have these conversations that carousels do not work. They work really well in e-commerce because people tend to look at every single thing that they find about the product. And if you can provide some sort of help or guidance to select an item of the choice, that could only help. The same way I could do it here with boots. And even things that are not that expensive, but something that you wear every day, people will be looking for every single image, including the video there, and zooming in just to see all the details, all the fine details. However, making images bigger will not help you all the time, because this will not help you to sell more flash memory, right? It's just not how things work. Because this is, again, a non-considered purchase. Let me jump a little bit to move on here. And the final thing that we also need to keep in mind is that we have this thing, which is very, very important and has improved dramatically over the last few years. Because we open our phones 86 times on average, 86 times a day. And we hit that hamburger icon probably more often than that, right? And so we really have to think about a thumb-driven design and what it actually means, because many interactions have to be driven by a thumb, because 75% of all interactions we do on mobile phone, and as you know, mobile traffic is now growing and has been, especially in e-commerce, mobile conversion is actually exceeding desktop conversion. We really have to optimize for the thumb, which means we need to look closer into how we're using the phone with our thumb. And it's interesting to see that we tend to have this general view that some areas are more accessible than others, right? So if you look into the green and the yellow areas are more accessible, while the red one is inaccessible. But it really depends on the pressure, because we can press, of course, with our finger in a different way. And it also depends on the posture. Now, in the past, we used to have only, like mostly only this with one hand. Like one hand and cradled would be the most popular ones, right? But here's a test for you. If you want to test your relationship, there is a perfect test that I developed. I'm very proud of it. Now, first of all, you can ask your loved one to go to the favorite website on a very slow connection. Right? Now we know that. Their reaction and how they interact with that site and with the phone will tell you a lot about the personality. That's number one. Number two, if you have a very small bridge, like there are some bridges where only one person can pass by at a given time, just before they pass over the bridge, ask them to reply to an email or to reply to something, to do something, doesn't matter what it is, and observe them using the phone. Now there are different kinds of people. Right? And different kinds of people will use the phone and hold the phone in a very different way. They will have different posture. So some people will do the Renaissance thing. When they say, okay, I have my phone, and they just keep walking. It's a very short, small bridge, and have water probably on both sides. Right? So they will be just, whatever, I don't care. So they hold the phone in one hand and just type like this. Now, these people take risks. Okay? These people take risks. There is a second kind of person who would hold the phone, cradled, right? Who would hold the phone while typing with the other hand. Okay? That's a slightly less risk-averse, let's say, right? And then there is a third person who would say, I will not do that while walking over the bridge. They are safe bets, right? So they don't take risks at all. But the problem here is, actually, these are different postures that we have, but specifically we need to look into when people interact with our phones, or with their phones on our sites, how do they hold their phones? So it's actually quite stable. You'll find that these two postures are quite popular. They're consistently used everywhere. The only exception is, of course, typing, because we type usually with two fingers or thumbs, right? So this is why red is very large here. Right? But also things change. So we cannot design only for right-handed people, only for left-handed people. It really heavily depends. Because we tend to change hands all the time, because you might have a back in the left hand or in the right hand. So you can't just say, let's do this or let's do that. But we need to know a few things. Specifically, we tend to use different devices in different times and in different positions. So the larger devices, the further people hold them away from the eyes. That kind of makes sense. So we use larger devices when sitting down more than phones, right? And on the other side, the smaller devices, the more people use it on the move. So larger devices are usually residing on the desk or on a stand. And while we're using them, we're always really bad at hitting things. I don't know about this guy, right? But we're really, really bad at hitting those targets, right? It's really rare that we hit them perfectly, which is why we need to design around that too, right? Think about that add to cart button. You might think, okay, this is a bit too much of user experience, whatever thing, but it's really important because your add to cart buttons need to have a larger padding, and because input is so imprecise, people tend to spend most of the time in the comfortable area, which is the central area. When you're building a new house and you can choose any position for your windows, where will they be placed? You want to be able to look outside of the window, so the question is, where would you be placed, right? And so most people tend to be quite central, right, within the area where they are. And this is also exactly what's happening on mobile. Because when we're looking on our pages or on e-commerce sites, we tend to look like through the window, and so the central things are more important, or should be more important. But because of a thumb, one thing we have to keep in mind is that the further away the button is, add to cart button or shopping cart button or anything of that kind, or checkout button or next button, the further away it is, the larger the padding should be. So the further away it is, the closer to 12 millimeters it should be. And here in the center, it should probably be around 7 millimeters. It's a research done by Steven Huber last year. And he also recommends a different framework when thinking about designing for mobile, also in context of e-commerce. Interesting thing is we tend to tap in the center as well, and then we tend to scroll in the center as well. It's really rare that we scroll at the very bottom or at the very top of the screen. So what does it mean for us now? If you have that Add to Cart button, that critical button, do not place it at the top. Place it at the bottom. It should be around here somewhere. Now, obviously, the main content, the image and the product details and stuff should be here. And this should be reserved only for navigation or something that's not so critical. So maybe your shopping cart icon should not be on the top, but should be at the bottom. And this is why many companies are actually playing around that idea as well. And so primary content in the center, secondary along the top and bottom edges, tertiary then behind menus at the top. Does it make sense so far? This is kind of what we know, at least from research. But what does it mean for us in terms of patterns we can use for e-commerce? Now let's take a look at this. Reasons why people abandon and tackle them. Now the first one is the most important one, is hidden costs. Now, if people don't know what to expect in terms of buying, they will not buy. And so our job is to make pricing very transparent. Now, here's a question for you. What do we need to know to display final prices right on the product page? Final price for that customer. What do we need to know? Yeah, we need to know taxes, where it's going to be shipped to, what else? Yeah, if they have any discount or not, but by default we probably would display, normal pricing. What else? Amount. We also need to know the currency. Very often we forget about the currency. It's really, really important for a reason I will explain in a second. But specifically, we also need to know the estimated shipping costs. Right? We can't know them before we ask the person where it's going to be delivered to. Now, unfortunately, like if you look into Walmart, an example, this is an old example from 3-4 years ago, but it's very common in many other places still. I have to go through 1, 2, 3, actually 6 spots, 6 steps in order to get the final price right here, which is actually a bit higher than was expected. This is why people abandon. So one simple way of dealing with this would be, okay, let's just try to look into IP, right? And based on IP, provide an estimated shipping. Well, at least it's not 0. It's a bit closer to what the user is going to end up paying. It's not correct, but it's a little bit closer to what they end up in the end. So that's already one step, but this is actually not good enough. Because we cannot really rely on IP, and then it really can heavily depending on the country where it's going to be shipped to. On the other side, we have this as an option, where just when people are intending to buy, you could prompt a little currency or country of delivery pop-up, saying you can choose your currency and the area where it's going to be delivered to right here. So once you update it, the price will be final. But it's a little bit late because at this point, you're already in the checkout. So we started playing with this as well. And so what we ended up with is, you click on the button when you want to buy, and then we end up with this little pop-up where you can select where you're going to ship, right? And if it's US, it's in dollars, and if it's in Europe, then it's euro, right? But then we thought, wouldn't it be better to just have free shipping instead and increase pricing a little bit? So we removed it and moved away towards something that's a little bit simpler. And please notice as well that we say here that your order will be delivered by February 14th. So very often we would say 2 to 3 business days. But this is not really helpful because it depends where it's going to be shipped from. You don't know if that country might have holidays or not. So it's really better to say, okay, you're going to get that book or get that product by that date for sure. The latest day you can count on. And so that worked better, the conversion increased, but then we thought maybe you can actually make it even better. And in the sidebar, we wanted to introduce as many details, as much detail that's necessary to not have any concerns at all. So here you have subtotal, taxes, shipping, expected delivery time, but also pay by card or PayPal, right? Because this is also something that introduces uncertainty. So we decided to test this one against this one. And the only difference is that here you have radio buttons, while here it just says it so as text, right? It's plain text. So can you guess why this performs better than this? Yeah, because it kind of gives you a sense of choice. Like you're choosing something actively, while the previous one is very passive. Well, in the end, we actually decided to go with this one because this is actually a trick. This is a dirty little trick, if you like. But you will find it quite a lot, like for example on Ryanair and other sites, because it really does drive conversion. But what's better, because in the end we need to eliminate all concerns at once, right? Subtotal, taxes, shipping costs, delivery times, fees, charges, and total price have to be all communicated. So what worked best, this is like from one of the projects I was working on, well, you can just have a little pop-up, it can look nice, where you ask in the very first visit, okay, where will the item be shipped to, and what currency do you prefer? And once the person has clicked on update, well, all the prices will be final prices right there. Right. So this could be a much better option than the one that we ended up with for now. And it's also critical to really show the price, the final price, in local currency, in the customer's currency. Because if it's not local currency, they don't know what they're going to end up with paying. They don't know if their credit card institute is going to charge them or what's going to be the conversion, right, on your side. So it just introduces uncertainty. We want to remove and eliminate all those uncertainties, right? And it also goes for other things, like for example, this is kind of ridiculous, but here you can select between standard shipping and express shipping, but how express is express? And how much more you're going to pay for it? You just don't know it, so when you don't know, you end up not buying, right? And very simple way of solving this would be to say, okay, here's an estimated arrival, standard, expedited, and express, and this is what it's going to cost extra. This is why plus 1190 would be better here. And then instead of saying 4 to 8 business days, it would be better to say delivered by, I don't know, July 15th or so. So actually giving that date, right? To avoid choice paralysis. And it doesn't hurt to also include stock availability there, just to be certain. Because you might wonder, you might laugh at this point, very often you can buy express, but the item is out of stock. So it's not very helpful, right? So if it's out of stock, it doesn't make sense to buy express. Another thing we tend to do a lot, we tend to compare, right? And when we compare, what do? We end up on a product page, and then we copy-paste the title of that product and paste it into Google just to see if somebody else has it cheaper. Who does that? Okay, quite a good number of people. So what turns out to be, it's dirty, so, but what turns out to work is to say, okay, when people start copy-pasting, just selecting the number, this article item number, you can just prop up a little pop-up here saying, hey, don't go anywhere. We've got the best price ever. And if you find it somewhere else cheaper, we're going to match the price. For many people, it will be a reason enough not to go anywhere else, right? Something to keep in mind. Now, here's a question for you. Which one of these two product page views, product listing page, when you start searching for Dell chargers, would you prefer? The one on the left and the one on the right. Now, you have your Dell machine. It's whatever, I don't know what it's called. And you want to have a battery now. Which one would you prefer? Okay, look into it for 3 seconds. Okay, who would prefer this one? Who would prefer this one? Now, this is interesting. Now, why would you prefer this one? Anybody? Yes, there is more information, but it's also so much information, isn't it? So cramped, no? Okay. Yes, delivery time, very good, important. What about this one? Why did you choose this one? Yes. So this one, yes? Yes, yes. So the problem here is when people search, they search for specific items. They want to have a confirmation that they're buying a proper charger that would fit their model. This is lacking model numbers, which is why the conversion would be much higher here. So front-loading the titles with keywords from model numbers is very, very important, especially for electronics. This is what people are looking for. They need a confirmation that they're looking at the right thing. To many of them, this will look the same. And this will even look the same. They will even ignore these images altogether. The only thing they will pay attention to is this, the model numbers. So it might look a bit weird and not as clean, but this will work better for conversion. So front-load keywords with rich product titles. And Amazon goes all the way. If you go into Amazon, they have sometimes even 20, 25 of those numbers there. This is not particularly helpful, because you have to find yours, but it's still better than not having it at all. Okay, let me just jump a little bit again. Another thing that's also interesting on the category page is what do we do in terms of listing all the items, right? Well, there are options. We can just go ahead, let's say we have 150 items in the category, right? You can say, okay, so I'm going to list all of the products on one page. So they can scroll. I mean, users can scroll. It's not a big deal, right? But then you can say, no, that's too much. Let's do pagination. So we'll have something like showing maybe 18 items per page, and then you need to navigate to another page to see the next 18 items and so on. And then you can also have load more button. You scroll down, and then you have load more button, and then you have to click on it to see more items. Or, of course, the infamous infinite scroll. You start scrolling down, and the items keep appearing, and they keep appearing, and they keep appearing, and you never hit the footer, and you keep appearing, and they keep appearing. So, for conversion, who would say, let's show them all. All items on one page works best. 150 items, don't forget that. Oh, some hands just disappeared. Okay, what about pagination? Who thinks pagination works best? Okay, who thinks load more button works best? Who thinks the infinite scroll works best? Who doesn't have an opinion at this point? Some people. So if you ask or if you monitor or kind of talk to customers, they will tell you that they hate all of these options. All of them. When you show all of it, they say, why do you show all of it? It's so slow on my machine, it's ridiculous, I can't see everything, and I can't navigate through all of this at the same time. So I say, okay, so I'm going to do pagination. And then they go, oh, why is it so slow? I have to click on this next thing all the time. This is just annoying, just show me more. And you say, okay, so I'm going to have a load more button so you can see more. Why do I have to click on this load more button all the time? And then you say, okay, so now here's infinite scroll, just see how much you want. Why do you keep scrolling, showing me more? I need to go to the footer. Like, so what is expected to do? So normally, if A doesn't work, and B doesn't work, and C doesn't work, then combination shouldn't work either, but not with people. With people, load more and infinite scroll turned out to work best, and the idea there is very simple, because we want to kind of combine best of both worlds. So when you come to the page for the first time, you see, depending on the screen size, from 10 to 30 items at once. Then you scroll down, and the next 10 to 30 show up. So you see at most 60 at a given time, right? And then we hit the load more pattern, the load more button. So that's great, because if you want to see more, you can click on load more button, and then more things appear. But by default, the first scrolling is very fast, so they see more items, and they can always hit the footer. And when clicking on that load more button, there is a nice white space between the first area and the second, so they feel like they're done with the first page and they move on to the second page. And you can also change the URL, because people tend to like to send emails to themselves. Why do we do that, by the way? Isn't that strange? We send the links to ourselves. It's like as if we're not getting enough emails anyway. It doesn't matter. And so they kind of continue navigating later. So this turns out to be working best. All right. Another thing that's interesting is the product page on its own. Now, on the product page, very often you will find articles saying, we need to have a very clean, organized, and minimal product page. The worst thing ever is a clean, organized, and minimal product page. You need a lot of detail on a product page. This is the page that people will explore like crazy. You need a lot of stuff on that page. Now, first of all, people tend to spend a lot of time on images. So the bigger the images, the better. That's very important. On the other side, they really need to gain some confidence that this product is the one that they need. So they look for everything, every single thing. I mean, it's just ridiculous sometimes what you find out in the interviews. This is essentially what we need to display, at least on a product page. Right? And there's a lot of stuff in here, because people will have questions and concerns about everything. And if you do have to reduce it, this would be the most important ones. But this is still quite a lot. So for me, a great reference example for a nice product page would be Walmart, where they have a lot of stuff going on here. Now, first of all, especially for electronics and fashion, you need return policy quite prominently, right? Now, obviously, they try to do some upselling here, right? They also explain the shipping options right here. And again, they ask first where the item is going to be delivered to. So this is my final price. Now, they also show the reviews. Now, also the naming here, it's not just iRobot Roomba 801. It has to be a bit more self-explanatory. So they add some copy to it. Obviously, huge images, video, thumbnails, and also very important, the breadcrumbs. Now, why are breadcrumbs so important? Well, obviously to navigate, but this is primarily important for Google traffic. Right? If people come from Google, they want to be able to see all the options because they might not be able to know where they actually are. Right? And then it keeps going when they show some related products, and people who bought these products also bought these ones. And then they have this signature here for the ratings. And we'll get into it in a second. And then you can also sort all the reviews by relevance as well. Right? So there are many things that are being communicated, and all of them have to be on the product page. They all have to be right there and very clear and very prominent, which again helps us eliminate all the concerns at once. But now, speaking about ratings, by the way, now if I give you a question, there are two options for you. You have two products to choose from. They're all very similar, both of them, kind of similar pricing as well, right? But one has 21 reviews with 4.5 on average, and the other has 9 reviews with 5.0. Okay, again, so you have two products to choose from. One has 21 reviews and has 4.5 on average, and the other has 9 reviews and has 5.0 on average. Okay? Now, who would choose 4.5? Now, who would choose 5.0? Who would look for something better? Okay, so just to, because not all of you saw each other, most people would prefer 4.5, despite of the fact that the other one has 5.0. Now why? Well, we don't trust them, do we? It's the same story over and over again. We don't trust that there are perfect products. There must be something wrong about it. There must be. Somebody must have a bad experience with it, right? And in fact, if you measure, right, 4.83 is the magical number you want to account for. If you can reach 4.83, that's going to be a bestseller. 5.0 is bad for you. It's really bad for business. So encourage your friends who already submitted 9 positive reviews to add at least 1 negative and explain what's so bad about it. You really need negative reviews to increase conversion. Because we are looking for this pattern. All the time when we're buying, we're looking for this pattern. We need many good reviews, and we need some bad reviews. And of course, we'll be reading the bad reviews first, especially when it comes to electronics or anything that's considered purchases, right? But it's also the same thing goes for books. And in fact, most people would prefer 4.5. But for many people, 4.5 is not good enough. They need to be in the area between 4.6 and 4.8. And I was thinking a lot about what would be a nice experience for checkout in general, but also specifically for deciding, right? And if you could extract the keywords that you have on, appearing in the reviews and display them like this is much more valuable than actually going through all of those reviews and finding it out. And you can go really granular with it, like TripAdvisor does, or other sites do, where you can actually sort reviews by pros and cons in here, for example. Or even better, this would be the ultimate great experience. If you need to buy something, like let's say a smartphone, well, you go on the page to get a smartphone, you click on smartphone, you select the properties or the qualities you care about, the things that are really important to you, and then it shows you the overview based on the reviews that other people submitted. Right? Instead of, you of course need also details like specs and things like that, but this is not good enough on its own. So if you could extract those keywords from the reviews, that could help too. And companies like AO.com does it really well. Because here, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll find a Q&A section where people who bought an item can be connected to people who are interested in buying an item. And if both of them value their conversation as useful, they get credits that they can use when buying the next item on the shop, right? So imagine that if you had access to somebody who bought an item like a month ago, and you could ask any kind of questions you like, right? That's very valuable. It's much better than just looking into the specs. All right, I have to jump a little bit over here and there. But of course, there is another thing that's also quite important. And when it comes to paying, well, we like these beauties, do we? Do we trust them? Well, sometimes. But if I ask you, which ones of these wonderful badges elicit trust for you, which ones would you pick? Well, I know that because I studied you. It looks like you trust Norton, you trust Google, and you trust Makev secure, right? And maybe a few others, doesn't matter so much. But we actually trust customer-facing brands more than anything else. So you could say, okay, so when you have a credit card checkout and with your credit cards and stuff, so you can just put in a logo and then the confidence will increase and conversion will increase as well. This does not work all the time. We had a case when Norton was added to the test for A/B tests and the conversion dropped. Not significantly, but it dropped. Why do you think is that? Yes. Exactly. When people see these badges, especially when they see Norton, they start getting concerned because many of them install Norton to get rid of viruses they have in their machine. So I was in one of the user interviews where the person sitting there told me that he didn't feel comfortable with pressing that button to buy just because he felt like I had to install Norton on my machine, website machine, to protect the website from viruses, but he wasn't sure if it's up to date. Okay, so this is the kind of conversations you end up with. So when you just add those logos, it doesn't mean that they're going to increase conversion. The best way you can do is, because they all cost money, it's not like they're coming for free. You just design your own. It might be good enough. Or just add a padlock icon, like just copy the one you have in Chrome in the left upper corner and put it on a button, and that might be good enough as well. Right? So security hints do help, but not all the time. And handmade icons and padlock icon can do the trick as well. But actually, this does, although it's actually nothing groundbreaking, here, coming from Baymart Institute again, this is a great example of how you can enhance it a little bit, just a padlock icon. That's it. And yeah, you can have some security lock as well here, if you want. Potentially, at least for testing. Okay. There is something else that's also interesting that we tried and tested, and it worked really, really well. And I don't see it happening everywhere, but it really heavily depends on if you can implement it or not. So people really slow down when they start checking out, when they have to type in the credit card data or when they see the review page. They really slow down. This is where they pay the most attention, right? So the problem is they also have worries all the time. They're worried that they will buy something that's wrong. They're worried that it's not going to arrive on time, and so on and so forth. So if you add a little note here saying, oh, well, you can finish checkout now, but you'll have 5 minutes to edit or cancel for free after you're finished, this will improve conversion as well, because people don't have to worry that much about it at this point. And of course, when they click that button, the purchase has to be held on for 5 minutes. Not everybody can afford it. Why? It is difficult to implement. Why? Yes, it's not easy to implement, and specifically you also need to store the credit card data somehow then, to hold off for 5 seconds. But then of course you can connect it with Stripe potentially and make it work, but it's not easy to implement. But conversion really does increase massively. So I highly encourage you to look into it if you can. Right? So consider enabling customers to edit or cancel their order within a limited threshold after the purchase. It will push them over that button, so to say. And another thing that's also important is that it really has to be clear what the last step is. Very often you will find something like continue on that button and nothing else. It has to be explicit. You have to really tell explicitly what's going to happen next. Instead of continue, it should be continue to review or finish checkout. Right? Another thing that people worry about a lot, and that's really interesting, when you are on that review page, and that's a very important page, very often you have this edit link. When you click on the edit link, people don't understand why they are brought to step 2 or 1, and they have to go to the next step and next step and next step again and again, because they filled in everything already. So why are we forcing them to go to step 1 again? That's just not clear. They're just inconvenient in any ways as well. And I'm wondering, why do we do that? Because if you have, let's say, a review page, you could click on the edit button, and then you could just break down this entire text that the user has typed in already into editable fields, and then click on OK or whatever, and then you have it saved if you want to adjust it. If somebody made a mistake in the last name or first name, they can do it inline. They don't have to be brought to step 1 to go to step 2 and 3 again. It just doesn't make sense. Right? And so that's something to also keep in mind. But then, of course, while we're doing so, there's also something else that we have to keep in mind. And that's the fact that we tend to copy-paste our emails, don't we? When somebody asks us to verify our email address, well, do we retype it? No. No. We just copy-paste, right? Who copy-pastes the email addresses? Okay, most of you. Now, here's the problem with that. The problem is, obviously, both sides want to have the correct email input. That's in the interest of the user, that's in our interest as well, right? But copy-pasting, or like having this confirmed email address, doesn't really work. I mean, because the vast majority of people will just copy-paste. So what can we do? Now, we can say, let's block copy-pasting. Some of you might have experienced it. A really bad thing to have, right? People really don't like it, like really don't like it. But then somebody came up with another idea, which I found just so evil. It's brilliantly evil. It's just incredible. So he said, what if we break down the confirm your email address into 2 input fields? First input before the @ symbol, and the other after the @ symbol. Good luck with copy-pasting. You're like, screw you, I will copy-paste twice if I want to. I will play by my games, by my rules. So both of them don't work. So how can we make it better? Now, this obviously doesn't work. So here's a question. When do people care most about the correctness of the email address? When they already paid, or before payment. There are only 2 options. Because if I look into you, and I studied you quite heavily, I know that most of you, when you land on that thank you for your order page, you don't close this page, do you? No. You will go and check your email and check your inbox just to make sure that that email, that magical email actually arrives. And if it doesn't arrive within 2 minutes, you start panicking. And so what do? You take a screenshot or save it as PDF. Who does that? Okay, so if people care so much about it, then would be also a good time to actually ask or help them to recover the email address. So this is what we ended up doing. So on the side, just before you buy, you can edit your email right here. There's an edit link, and then you can actually edit it. And also, once you purchased an item, here you have another link saying send confirmation to another email if you want to. And once you typed it in, right, this is going to be stored as a secondary email. And at this point, we're certain that that person's email address, one of those email addresses, will be correct for sure. But you might say, but do we need email in the first place? Because we can just do social sign-in, right? Yes, we can, but you should be expecting more accounts than people using your site. Some people might have signed in with Twitter, and they will forget it next time they sign in. So they will try to sign in with Facebook or with Google or with the email address. They will just not remember and wonder why their orders are not actually in their dashboard. That's kind of important as well. And then, of course, many of us have seen this, because there is another thing that's also important, and it boils down to passwords, right? Now, if I look at you, I know that you're like HolyJS audience, so you use password manager, some of you. Okay? So who does use password manager? Who does not use a password manager? It's a safe place. So imagine that out of I don't know how many HolyJS attendees here, 50% is not using password managers, and we are quite techy. Do you think that most people out there are using password managers? No. In fact, if you look and study them, you'll find that they have on average 4.2 passwords. Now, what passwords are they? This is probably the same for many of you as well. Now, there is, of course, I have to stop this navigation, I think. Now, of course, there is the password, the ultimate, the mother of them all, the Gmail password. The Gmail password is important. You don't want somebody to know your Gmail password. And it has all the things it needs, lowercase, the uppercase, the special symbols, the numerical things, everything it needs, maybe even an emoji if you're very creative, right? It has it all. You don't remember it. Most of you don't remember it. So you save it somewhere in text file on, well, that's what most people do. Save it on text file and then it leaves somewhere on desktop, right? But then there is a second one, the Facebook, or this is not your case, I know, but most people out there, not in Russia, Facebook. Facebook password is very important as well. Lowercase, uppercase, digits, everything, you got it. But then you have another one. You have the online banking. Now that's a shorter one. That's the one you remember, because you have to use it quite a lot. So you remember it, it's maybe like 5, 7, maybe 8 digits or so, very often, but it's the one that's memorable, right? And then there is the fourth one. Yes, that one, right? If somebody asks you to set up an account, it's not like you're waking up in the morning hoping to finally create a new account, but if somebody forces you to create an account, you're going to use that password, right? Am I correct? More or less, okay. But what if your password is not good enough for them? What if they tell you that you're missing wonderful special characters that need to be completed to make your password stronger? Well, you take your password, you use it as a baseline, and then you add those characters that they need to pass through. Who does that? Okay, many people, all right? So the problem there is, once you've done that, at the moment when you're checking out, when you finish checking out, you will have forgotten that password already, and you will have to recover password next time. And that's super expensive, because if you look into this data, 92% of people when trying to sign in give up if they don't remember password or username. That's a huge number, okay? Oh, just 1 minute, really done, almost done. And at the same time, 75% will not complete the purchase if they have to recover password as well, right? That's like a really, really big deal. So what we ended up doing is quite simple. Again, password is something that actually stays between the guest checkout and like a sign up. So we have this little link here in the middle saying, set your password and get an extra $15 discount for next purchases. That's the only thing that the user needs to complete to set up an account, right? And then you click on the set up your password thing. Okay, first here, maybe. So if you want to check the email. And then if you click on set your password, no limits, no characters, no rules or requirements, just pick a password you can easily remember, you set it up, you are logged in, and you're done. Right? And of course, if you're typing in something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we write it's just ridiculous, right? But essentially, most people will be using that password anyway. And by the way, one thing to note here, if you have some example here, like honey jack carrot cake, some people will be using it. So you have to actually also track for that. So this is just a couple of things to keep in mind. Here's a brief summary of everything we've covered so far today. You also can get the slides and stuff. Show final price early on, including fees and taxes. Large images matter. Considered and non-considered items, they demand different designs. Buttons at the bottom on mobile. Lazy load and infinite scroll. Product detail page is dense and detailed. Has to contain all the information. 4.83 is a magical review rating thing. Delay account creation until the end, so adding password in the end. Also validate email just before and just after the purchase, and allow people to edit or cancel order after purchase. So there are many trends, but you can get the slides and then we'll have all of it. And then just free resources, good UI, great for all kind of tests that they're running at a given time. A/B tests and all the stuff, really good for e-commerce. There is also 10ecommercetrends.com, which covers every year, covers 10 e-commerce trends. It doesn't surprise you. And then there is also Baymart, which has a tremendous library of different research papers on everything from search to checkout. So I highly encourage you to look into it as well. With this in mind, meow again, and I'll see you in the discussion room, right? You can ask in Russian as well.